Hi, my name is Mackenzie Rogers, and today I'll be doing my project on the Stalin era. The first question was, what are fear tactics used to keep the Soviet Union under control? The first fear tactic used was show trials, and show trials were basically public trials that were presented out through all of the nation and the region that everyone saw, that was already pre-scripted trials that were, the defendant would usually be, the accused would usually be prominent public figures like very famous politicians, and Stalin basically wanted to make an example out of them to show that anyone who opposed Stalin's ideas was the enemy. The second way to promote fear was through a story commonly used about Pavlik Morozov. I can't pronounce that correctly, but he was a little boy, and according to the story, he found his father compromising with the enemy, and he turned his father into the state, and even went as far to testify against his father, and then was later killed by his father and his supporters. And it was just to show this, and that story was basically to show the selflessness of this boy, and to instill the idea that children need to be taught to have loyalty to the state over the family, and be prepared to denounce your family at any point in time. And the last way to instill fear was Stalin encouraged destroying any personal ties among citizens, and he did this by setting up incentives so that if someone was reported, if you reported someone, you would possibly get a part of their property after they had been, taken away to the labor camps, or if not all of it. And another way that he used to do that was if a person accidentally or involuntary or in a small way even made contact with someone who was guilty or being accused of being an enemy, they would also be sent to prison and faced every single trial that the person being accused would face. The second question was, how was art used to chronicle life under the Soviet Union? And the first way was using a picture that was captioned, "Prisoners would go to extremes to avoid back-breaking labor." And it shows two guards with guns watching this man pull a cart full of very heavy wood, and just showed how difficult these men were and women were given jobs of doing, and quotas that they had to meet that were completely unrealistic. And it also goes into the idea that people would go as far as to cut off their own limbs just to go to a hospital so that they could get a break. The second way that art was used is pictures were shown of the architecture of camp, and how closely, how badly these buildings were made, and how they were all cramped together. And also, it showed like the inside of the barracks and how narrow they were, and the pallets that these men would have to sleep on, and women that would have to sleep on, and they were very straight and flat and very uncomfortable and could barely fit the length of one person's body. And the last way art was used was through propaganda posters, and there were posters of encouraging or disencouraging counter-revolutionary acts, and basically just trying to create paranoia throughout these citizens that they could be arrested at any single time during the day, encouraging denouncing of your friends, neighbors, and even your family. Question 3 was, what is the process of placing someone in a gulag? Arrest could be made at any time, anywhere, at by anyone, okay? So these agents would come, and usually at night, because that's when it was most secretive, and they would search the house, and no one could leave or enter while that search was commencing. And then after the arrest, the accused would usually be taken to a prison on on a truck called the Black Raven or the Black Maria, and sometimes that would be a disguise saying like meat truck or something like that to not make any bystanders turn heads to see what that was. And at these prisons, the interrogations would basically be torture, and people would be beaten and raped, and it was absolutely horrible. And then they would be put into these little cells where they could not communicate with their other fellow prisoners, but they would try to by doing tapping, and that became really commonly used throughout the prison. And it was lice infested. And political prisoners, they were treated the worst. They were put in solitary confinement cells where they could barely even take a couple steps, and they were just treated the absolute worst, and they were tortured the worst too. And then after the prisoners would have a trial, sometimes they would have a trial in front of a troika, which was three judges, and most of these trials just end up in a sentencing. And then the people would be brought to a labor camp, and at that labor camp, they'd be brought to a region, and then where the labor camp was. Then usually they would have to buy trains, and then usually they would have to walk to their labor camp. And then when prisoners arrive, and this is a question for living environment of the gulags, when prisoners would arrive at these camps, some of them weren't even built, and the prisoners had to proceed to build them themselves. And so a day in the life was basically waking up extremely early with a little time to get ready and a small, barely edible, disgusting breakfast, and then they would proceed to work until lunchtime. Then they'd get a small break to either eat some of the rations from breakfast or eat a small portion of soup, and then they would have to continue to work again all the way through the night. And this would sometimes last to 10 to 12-hour work days. And then you had to stay in line for about an hour for for the guards to call roll call before you could go eat. And you'd also get your food by how much of your quota you met that day. So if you met a bunch, you would get more food. If you met very little under your quota, you would get barely any food. And the barracks that the prisoners lived in were disgusting. They were dirty, and these prisoners had to sleep on these uncomfortable wooden pallets, and there were washrooms available for the prisoners, but they would barely want to be used because they were too exhausted to wait in line after that day. Question 5, the fall of the Gulag system. So basically, when Joseph Stalin died on March 5th, 1953, there were still 2,526,402,000 people still in the camps, and they were most of those people were not any criminals. Like a very small portion of them were actually considered criminals that should have been there. Not in that bad of circumstances, but criminals who still needed to be punished for something. Then Lavrentiy Beria, a Soviet politan, declared mass amnesty 3 weeks later after Stalin died, which gave prisoners that had a less than 5-year sentences, pregnant women with small children, and anyone under the age of 18, the ability to be free from these prison camps. And then Beria was actually arrested in 1953 and executed for anti-Soviet activities. And then began the process of de-Stalinization, which was basically discrediting and abandoning the ideas of Stalin. And then when Khrushchev, Stalin's the person who first succeeded Stalin after his death, he was put in a very difficult position because he had to decide whether to denounce all of Stalin's idea and possibly be executed, or to do what was right and what he believed in. And he made a speech that basically acknowledged the purge, and that he denied all of Stalin's ideals. And it took 5 years for the Communist Party after that to begin to take down, to get rid of all Stalin ideals and to depart from that lifestyle. But then it went through ups and downs. The Soviet Union would go through periods of time where they would just forget the purge and it didn't even matter. And then they began to talk about it. But still, even to this day, former members of the KGB have still not been prosecuted, and some even reap benefits from their positions, like housing, and that's the end of my project.